Hello everyone, and welcome to your 9th lesson for Grade 8 History, World War I. In today's lesson, you're going to learn how the war was fought on land, at sea, and in the air. It was the first war of its kind.
I think one really clear way of understanding the shift in World War I in terms of technology is that soldiers rode in on horses and they left in airplanes.
At the beginning of World War I, warfare is almost in the 19th century style. The French sincerely believed that going at the troops with determination at enemy troops is the way to go. What they don't understand is the collision of technologies.
General Pershing didn't believe in the trench warfare. He grew up on the plains fighting in Indian warfare where it was an open confrontation. So he trained his troops to fight in the open warfare. The British and French generals thought he was crazy. They criticized him for this.
It's impossible to cross that deadly beaten zone, the deadly zone between the two lines. The most determined line of soldiers cannot oppose a machine gun that fires hundreds of rounds a minute.
World War I wasn't just the first industrial war, it was also the first scientific war. It was the first time that societies had taken all of their resources of science and intelligence and said, how do we do this better? How do we fight better? How do we develop technologies?
A lot of the armaments you see in World War I had been used before: submarines, trench warfare, Gatling guns, machine guns. What happens during World War I is that these become mature and these become even more destructive.
During the war, the governments of all the different warring powers put enormous amounts of time and effort into scientific and technical development, so that the advancements which would have happened anyway happen at a much more rapid pace, and they happen according to the priorities of the warring powers.
Something happened in trench warfare that changed the course of the war and changed the way we understand warfare today, and that is chemical warfare.
The first gas attack was at a place called Vimy Ridge, and it was mostly Canadian soldiers who were being attacked. And the Canadian soldiers who were in the trenches saw this cloud of haze coming towards them. They had no gas masks. They had no equipment to protect them. Chlorine gas causes your lungs to fill with liquid, and so essentially you drown from the inside out. It was really the first war in which all of the technologies and science and industry of the 19th century were put to the sole purpose of killing people.
Let's start with the most obvious during World War I, and that was war that was being fought on land. You have already learnt about the trenches and the Western Front. There were some big battles that were fought on land. One of those battles was the First Battle of Ypres in Belgium. In fact, it was this battle that actually formed the trenches. The First Battle of Ypres, which went from the 19th of October to the 22nd of November 1914, was the first of 3 costly World War I battles centered on the city of Ypres in Western Flanders. Attempted flank attacks by both the Allies and the Germans failed to achieve significant breakthroughs, and both sides settled into trench warfare that would characterize the remainder of the war on the Western Front. This deadlock was truly established by the 22nd of November. British and German troops died in the thousands, but neither side could break out through the lines of the other. If you look at the map provided, you can see the French forces are in blue and the British forces are in red, with the German forces in green.
I'm here in the Flemish city of Ypres, and here several ferocious battles took place during the First World War. In this video, I'm gonna talk about the First Battle of Ypres that basically ended the War of Movement and started the stalemate, the trench warfare that eventually would claim millions of lives. Keep watching. Good to have you back on the channel. If you are new, my name is Stefan. I'm a Dutch history teacher. I like to cover history, preferably on location, like right now. I'm in the Belgian city of Ypres. And if you find it interesting, then consider subscribing and also hit the notification bell. And you can also support me via Patreon and via PayPal. The links are in the description. On the 4th of August, German troops crossed the German-Belgian border. The German Schlieffen Plan was put into action and it was all about speed. The Germans advanced towards Liège, which was surrounded by heavy fortresses. With their siege howitzers Big Bertha, these fortresses were pulverized. Next was Namur, which was soon taken by the same tactics. The French that wanted to help the Belgians in their defense were halted at the Battle of Charleroi, and the British were stopped at the Battle of Mons, after which they retreated. The Belgians retreated further to Antwerp. Towards the end of September, the Germans laid siege to Antwerp. The city would hold out for less than 2 weeks. That month, the so-called race to the sea commenced. The goal was not to reach the sea as soon as possible. The goal of the Germans and the British and French was to outflank the enemy. It led to several clashes at Ypres and the Yser, as a German officer wrote to his parents. 2 days ago, early in the morning, we were attacked by an immensely superior English force, 1 brigade and 2 battalions, and were turned out of our positions. The fellows took 5 guns from us. It was a tremendous hand-to-hand fight. How I escaped myself, I am not clear. War is terrible. We are all hoping that a decisive battle will end the war. South of Ypres, the British troops pushed back the German 6th Army and crossed the Lys River, but made no further progress. North of Ypres, the German 4th Army fought at the Yser River and were halted by the Belgians, who opened the sluice gates, inundating the land and creating a water barrier between them. Therefore, the fighting became concentrated around Ypres itself. On the 19th of October 1914, the First Battle of Ypres commenced. It started as an attack from both sides, but soon the Allies were on the defensive. British General John French wanted to retreat from the emerging Ypres salient, but he was overruled by French Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre. As the British ran out of artillery shells, their small arms took out many of the German attackers who attacked in dense masses. This also has to do with the fact that the British soldiers were professional soldiers from the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force, and the German attackers mostly consisted of inexperienced soldiers. The Allies hid behind farmhouses and began digging trenches. These initial trenches were very makeshift and soon filled with water because of the continuous rain. From the 21st till the 30th of October, the Germans carried out dispersed attacks, but from the 31st of October onwards, these attacks became more concentrated, almost breaking the British lines. However, the British, they managed to hold their lines. As November passed, the German attacks became more sporadic, and eventually Commander Falkenhayn decided to break off the attack due to the lack of progress, also the mounting casualties, and the fact that the Germans also ran out of artillery shells. The Allies were still in control of Ypres, or basically what was left of it, since the medieval cloth town was smashed by artillery bombardments. Its iconic buildings were destroyed. As John Keegan wrote, already the magnificent Gothic buildings of the ancient wool town, the cloth hall, the cathedral, the merchant weavers' houses were falling into ruin under the weight of heavy German artillery fire. The outlying country too was taking on the pockmarked, denuded look that would characterize its landscape for years to come. The battle was a bitter foretaste of what was to come. It ended the war movement, started the stalemate, the trench warfare that eventually would claim millions of lives. This battle, the First Battle of Ypres, claimed tens of thousands of lives. Here is David Stevenson with some numbers. For these results, they paid a heavy price. In the Battle of the Yser, the Belgians suffered 20,000 casualties, or 35% of their remaining army. The French, who held the line running north from the salient to the inundations and whose role in saving Ypres has been neglected, lost 50,000, and the BEF 58,000 against German casualties of 130,000. Near Langemark, 25,000 young German soldiers perished, which was dubbed Kindermord by Ypres, or the Massacre of the Innocents at Ypres. Did you know that Adolf Hitler saw action in this region as well? And the First Battle of Ypres was fought on such a large scale that the fighting did not only take place in the city. The battles of Langemark, Geluveld and Nonnebosse are part of this one as well. Official historians mark the 22nd of November as the official end of the First Battle of Ypres, but in reality the fighting continued as the stalemate set in. As the Germans switched their focus more on the Eastern Front, German commander Falkenhayn ordered his western forces to expand and deepen the makeshift trenches, creating a system of several lines. He saw this as a temporary solution, so he could release troops for mobile operations elsewhere. More battles for Ypres would take place during this war. On the 22nd of April 1915, the Second Battle of Ypres began with a German offensive. And during this battle, the Germans used poison gas. On the 31st of July 1917, the British attacked, opening the Third Battle of Ypres, also known as the Battle for Passchendaele. In 1918, 2 more battles took place in this region. In short, there is much more to cover. A big thanks to my patrons who support me. You see their names on the screen. You can also support me via Patreon or via PayPal. The links are in the description. If you found this video interesting and you haven't subscribed yet, well, please do so. If you're interested about the Eastern Front of the First World War, you can click right here. And if you're interested in the First World War in general, well, I have a whole playlist for you. You can find it right here. I want to thank you for watching and best wishes from the Belgian town of Ypres.
Now remember that part of militarism was increasing one's navy, and this is where we had war at sea. The range and power of the warring nations' naval fleets, along with their ambition to control the world's waterways, were major reasons that World War I spread so quickly. Naval warfare, meaning war in the ocean, had always been unpredictable because of the role of the weather and other factors. But new technologies made it even more so. Mines, torpedoes, and submarines introduced new threats that made even the greatest warships vulnerable. Now, a mine is like a bomb, and they would place these mines in the ocean. These would just float around in the ocean, and if a huge warship had to touch the mine, it would explode, damaging the warship, often sinking the ship, and there was a large loss of life. Compared to giant dreadnoughts, which took years to build and were manned by hundreds of men, submarines were cheap and generally used a crew of fewer than 2 dozen. A submarine is a type of ship that goes under the water. Mines were cheaper still, and once laid, required no crew at all. So you could place the mine and then go, and you knew that somewhere along the line it would do its job. In World War I, naval power was more often used to maintain control of trade routes than to capture new territory. As it turned out, great sea battles between large surface fleets were rare in the war. Instead, the submarine came to own the seas, and Germany became the undisputed master of employing this new technology. Despite the increasing of navies, especially in Britain and Germany, there was actually only one major sea battle of the war, and this was the Battle of Jutland in 1916. In the event, chaos and confusion reigned. The Germans had the best of the exchanges, but the British fleet was simply too large. The Germans sank 14 British ships and lost 11 themselves, but never left their harbours again. Both sides claimed to have won the battle. On the one hand, the Germans caused more damage than they received. On the other, the Battle of Jutland certainly failed to achieve the most important objective for Germany, which was to remove the blockade. So what happened was, Britain set up ships that did not allow Germany to leave. It formed a blockade, like a barrier. This then stopped people from being able to leave Germany to go to other countries to get food, to get supplies, to get weaponry, that type of thing. It really, really restricted Germany's trade routes. When Britain joined the war on the 4th of August 1914, they did not immediately execute the entire plan to blockade all German imports. It was not until nearly 4 months into the war that Britain labeled the North Sea a war zone and also began directing limited forces in the Mediterranean as well to restrict all German trade routes. And then lastly, we had war in the air. In the summer of 1914, the aeroplane was less than 11 years old. Aviation was a fledgling technology, meaning it was very, very young, that fascinated many, but still generated skepticism, meaning people didn't really trust it when it came to practical applications. Most aeroplanes of the time were slow, flimsy contraptions with barely enough power to lift a single pilot and perhaps one passenger. While numerous countries had shown an interest in military aviation, the concept of using aeroplanes to wage war was still a radical idea. All that changed during World War I. Overall, aerial warfare cannot be said to have played a fundamental role in World War I, as it did in World War II. Bombing served more as a psychological weapon than a practical one, and the technology necessary to cause the kind of massive damage that bombing would be able to inflict in the near future had not yet been developed. On the other hand, World War I itself encouraged the rapid improvement of the aeroplane, both in general and specifically as a weapon. During the 4 years of conflict, the overall stability and safety of flying improved tremendously, as did the power, speed, and maneuverability of the newest designs. Moreover, the war fostered the general public's respect for aviation and spawned a new generation of pilots and aircraft designers who would go on to take human flight to the next level after the war. Many movies have been made about what it was like to be a fighter pilot during World War I. Here is an extract from a movie to try and give you some idea, an experience about what it was like to be a fighter pilot.